Gae Buckley, you were the production designer for Amazon's I'm Your Woman. The film takes place in the 1970s. What was it like diving into that era?
Well, I was working with Julia Hart, who had been looking at the research of that era, but I was relying a little bit more on memory because I was in high school and college in the 70s. So we were trying to, a lot of what I've seen sometimes is the 70s are almost an exaggerated version of it to sell it as the 70s. And we were trying to keep it a little more low key than that. Of course, we did have an awful lot of wallpaper, but that was because both Julie and I love wallpaper. I didn't used to, but she taught me to really love it. So we've been using it, in several movies I've done with her. So that was fun. But we looked, we went to Library of Congress, and looked through a lot of magazines because there's a lot of research on that era because, it's a stone's throw in history. Mm-hmm. And it was really fun. But some of it was definitely based on memory. Like the nightclub was kind of based on dance clubs that I remember when I was in college and had, around that era of my life. And like they always seemed to be in these old grand theaters or clubs that somebody bought cheap and then painted black or, dark. So we found a location that worked for that. And,
So how big was your wallpaper budget then?
I don't know the exact number, but I will tell you that I went to the line producer, Bart Lipton, very early on. And I said, I'm just warning you, we're going to be making a lot of wallpaper. And he came to me like halfway through and he goes, boy, you weren't kidding about the wallpaper, were you?
Wait, so how much did you make? How many designs were there?
Oh gosh, my art department coordinator, who is wonderful, Maggie Adams, would keep this spreadsheet of all the wallpapers for all the locations. I don't know how many, I've forgotten how many locations there were, 20, 30. And there wasn't wallpaper in every single location, but there was a lot. Some we bought, like in Jean's house, the movie opens up in Jean's house, which in our backstory, we decided that her husband, Eddie, had hired her an interior decorator. So we kind of decorated. And so we actually found one vintage wallpaper in her bedroom, but the rest we designed and made in the art department.
Do you have a favorite design?
Of wallpaper?
Yeah. That's in the movie?
Actually, the favorite was the vintage, the one that's behind Jean's headboard in her bedroom. I love that. It was just amazing.
Well, the movie is like a flip on the 1970s like crime drama from the perspective of the wife.
Yes.
So how much did that impact your design?
Well, it's interesting because the movie was inspired by Michael Mann's movie Thief, which was actually made in 1980. But James Caan plays a thief, and he tries to get married, he tries to have a baby, he tries to have a life and a home in the suburbs, but he just ultimately destroys his life. And there's this scene in the movie where, he gives Tuesday Weld and the baby this chunk of money and says, you got to go. And so Julia Hart saw that and she thought, what's her story? Let's follow her. So it's not a continuation, but it's inspired by that. So have I gone off topic of your question?
Oh, no, that's just the backstory.
What was your question?
How much did it being from a female perspective of the wife and, a new mother?
What I was getting to, a very long way of getting there, was that Thief had been production designed by my mentor. His name was Mel Bourne, who was production designer in 1980. I worked with him in the early 90s. So for me, it was a little bit of an homage to Mel. And then for Julia, it was a little bit of an homage to Michael Mann. So that's what I was going to tell you.
That's like full circle there then.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Well, I also imagine it's fun working on this movie because she's on the run. So you move through a bunch of different locations. You have your house, the safe house, the cabin, and all these other stops in between, like the disco you referenced earlier. So what was the process like of scouting these locations, or did you build anything?
Well, early on, before we even started prep, we were actually looking at shooting because we knew it was a $16 million movie, so we knew we weren't going to be building a lot of sets on stage. So we wanted to find, the bones of a city and outskirts to shoot. So we were originally actually looking at Detroit and Buffalo. And then when Rachel Brosnahan signed on, we knew our schedule was going to push till later in the winter, and we figured to avoid all those blizzards, we started looking a little farther south. So then we started looking at Cincinnati and Pittsburgh. And we were doing a lot of sort of Google map scouting around Pittsburgh and Braddock and McKeesport and the areas around Pittsburgh, and really fell in love with it. So we did a preliminary scout there first. We had a fantastic location manager named John Atkins, who we met on that first scout. And, on that scout, we nailed down, at least half a dozen, maybe more of the locations that were made, like the nightclub, the neighborhood for the safe house. And so that was good. So we knew we were going to end up in Pittsburgh. And then when we started, for instance, the safe house that you mentioned, there's a lot of time spent in the interior of that house, but there were actually deleted scenes that were in the front of the house and behind the house when she's running away and down a staircase. So we wanted to find a neighborhood where all of the houses worked, essentially, because we ended up shooting in the interiors of 3 different houses, and then the exteriors of 4 different houses, but they were all within a block. So it just became like this, a little bit of a puzzle piece, putting all that together. But I think it worked. The hero house had all the bones that we needed when we first found it, and after we put together a plan of how to do it all, Julia, loved it and signed on. So that was good.
What about the cabin?
The cabin we built. So one of the great things about Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania was that there's a rebate for building either on stage or on the back lot. And we shot at Churchill Studios that has this very bucolic rolling green hills and woods. And it was the perfect place for us to build the cabin. The challenge there, thanks to the art director, Gary Costco, was to make it still look pristine and bucolic with an entire crew lining up, in the trucks and up on the hills and coming down with all the equipment, because we actually shot in that cabin for quite a while. But we built the whole cabin, interior and exterior, was one set.
So you had to build the hatch in the floor as well.
Yeah.
How big was that?
Oh, I'd say it was about 3 by 4 feet, maybe. And it wanted to be just deep enough so that a person could crouch down and pull it down. And we had, I don't know if you saw it, but there was like an old rug in there and a couple of boxes and some old toys from, either when Cal was a child or from Paul, using it as his hiding place.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jean goes through a lot of growth in the movie because she's not really self-sufficient in the beginning. And you kind of see that reflected in design, because her house, it's these very bright colors of yellows and greens. And then when she's on the run, it becomes kind of darker, more browns and tans, because she's like leaving the safety of those colors behind. So how did you approach color in your design?
Well, we knew that Jean's journey was going to start in the upscale suburban house. And that Eddie had never let her go into the city. So we knew that she was going to be sort of progressing, through motels and cafes, diners, even the bargain store, the pharmacy, the hospital. All of those wanted to be somewhat standalone locations or in a suburban mall of some sorts. They did not want to be urban. So the challenge was, we'd find these great locations, but they'd be in the city of Pittsburgh or in a town. And so, no, we need green trees around there. So we ended up actually all over that area. And the color palette, she starts out with the yellows and the greens in her house. And that's really the only time we ever see that color. From then on, we're progressing. For instance, like the last time you see her husband, Eddie, I wanted there to be, sort of a little foreshadowing of the danger that he's instigating in her life and his own. And so we made that front door. There's sort of a textured 70s front door, and we painted the exterior of it red so that when he opens the door to greet his, thug friends, the last time we see Eddie is in front of this red, and then he closes the doors on Jean's face. A little bit of a nod to, Al Pacino and the Godfather closing on Diane Keaton. And then from there, a lot of the color palette was from reference and research that we all sort of, Julia and I and Patrick, Cassidy, our set decorator, all sort of fell in love with, like the tangerine orange of one of the motel rooms. There's a lot of wood paneling. And then it gets sort of, she sort of stays on the outskirts of towns and small towns. And then when she gets to the safe house, that we kind of wanted to be like a nowhere place out of time with the rest of the movie. And so if you notice, the wallpapers are a little more old fashioned, everything, there's nothing there that screams 70s. It's just, it was a little bit more old fashioned. And, there's not a lot of color in there other than her bedroom. We had some nice colors on the wallpaper there, which actually was inspired by a location that we had seen that had a similar wallpaper. We all fell in love with that. And we had we would put in the art department while we're making the movie, we put pictures on the wall of each of the key locations, and we put them up in story order with color swatches and set dressing and, set design pieces and furniture and so that you could sort of see everything. But it's also in story order, so you could actually walk and see how the colors were progressing as a palette until it gets to the point where she is in the country. She goes full out to this bucolic area where she finally gains her strength when she meets Terry, and they get worried about Cal's whereabouts. And that's when they turn around and go into the city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they start out in the club, and I wanted it to be dark, but not black walls like clubs I actually remembered. So we went with this sort of dried blood color of deep burgundy maroon, mm-hmm. with gold and metallic highlights and chromes to pick out the light. And of course mirror ball.
You got to have a mirror ball in a disco.
Yeah. And then as there's a hallway, so they go from the dance floor to the back room, and we had to build that hallway. Didn't exist, and the back room didn't really exist. We made that out of an old ceramic studio that happened to be in the building. And the hallway, the colors also wanted to be a little on the jarring side because she's sort of really out of place there. She doesn't really. So I don't know if you noticed, but they're dark green, and there's like this weird fuchsia pink, and we just kind of wanted it to be a little not unnerving for her. And then of course that we get to the back room, and again there's reds for me is indicating possible danger.
And there is.
And then as she gets so that of course there's a shootout, they run, poor Jean is walking in the rain all night, she loses her baby's little sock, she's a mess, right? And so she finally goes for the one big ugly cry, and she finds a laundromat. And it's really the one place in the movie where other women kind of come and give her a little sort of heartfelt nurturing. And, they give her a little pat on the back, and they offer her a towel to dry her off. So that's the only location or set we introduce the color of pink into. It's bringing a little bit of that heartfelt feeling toward
warmth. And I love it's gorgeously designed and shot. So, well, Gae, thank you so much for your time. It was great speaking to you.
Thank you. It's an honor. Thank you.